Call our council meeting to order. We'll start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, grant that we who would seek to serve you may have the wisdom of your Spirit, the guiding of your hand, and the grace to serve together for the prosperity of our city, the Gold Coast. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Upstanding for National Anthem. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is God by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains that let us sing, advance Australia fair. We could have done a second verse with our mask on. Ah, okay. Oh, well done. All right. All right, councillors, everyone's here. I have Division 1 councillor online, and there's only a logo of him on it there. Anyway, whether he's online or not, I can't tell. Councillor Hamill, you're online?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, there you go. We're all here. So item 1 is done. Condolences, item 2, I'll go to Councillor Vorstev. And just before that, for those who's viewing and notice that I'm not wearing a mask at the moment, I'm drinking my coffee. Councillor Vorstev.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I move that a motion of condolence be passed and that a message of sympathy be forwarded to the Ong family on the passing of Dennis Ong.
Second, Councillor Tozer, put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, just a few days ago, I was informed that that Dennis had passed, and Dennis was a very well-regarded, much-loved and formidable character about the Bond University campus, and he had an instrumental role in shaping the way legal education was provided at Bond University, but also in the lives of many students who would then take up that career right here on the Gold Coast and elsewhere. I just thought I'd take the opportunity that's afforded to me today just to read 3 short paragraphs of a memo that was circulated to the Bond family, which I know would hold some value, particularly to the family, but also the students whose lives he touched. This is a memo from Professor Tim Brailsford. It is with a heavy heart that I advise of the passing of Professor Dennis Ong. Professor Ong passed away yesterday, aged 73, after a brave and difficult battle with illness. He'd been on sick leave since the start of this year. Dennis was a familiar and friendly face around Bond and his local neighbourhood in Robina, living near the campus. Among students, Professor Ong was known for his high standards and expectations on students. His course in equity is part of the Bond law legend, having caused many bright and aspiring law students to have restless nights. I'm sure others at the pointy end of that education also had restless nights. Mr. Mayor, in addition to his expertise in equity, Professor Ong also specialised in securities and commercial law, and he held degrees including a PhD from the University of London. After establishing an academic reputation at Macquarie University, Dennis joined Bond at the very early days of the university for a great adventure. Mr. Mayor, I really felt moved to move this today because Bond University, when it was established, was an experiment, and those who invested in that experiment put everything on the line, their professional reputations and their professional careers. And Dennis stuck with the university, made a huge impact to that university and embedded himself in the Robina community. And it's very sad that he has passed, and hopefully his family can take some comfort that his contribution will be recognised outside of the university bubble itself, as the impact of his students have impact across our nation and globally as well.
Okay. Add your name to the... Okay. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. Could you add Councillor Tozer? Okay. Then now we go to Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that a letter of condolence be passed and be sent to the Ferguson family on the death of Leslie John Ferguson, otherwise known as Les. Les was a well-regarded member of our Gold Coast community, and he and his wife Eunice, they were awarded the Sports Administrators of the Gold Coast City in the yearly awards. Les was a life member of Gold Coast Cricket and also a life member of the Palm Beach Currumbin Cricket Club. And he was very involved, and in fact all the family are very involved in junior sports throughout the city, especially with AFL and junior cricket. Les leaves behind his wife Eunice and their children Wayne, Michael, Paul and Lyle, and father-in-law, grandfather and great-grandfather to their families. And Les will be really sadly missed in the community. He was a quiet achiever, but over the years, and I've known Les for probably a long time, and anyhow, but Les was one of those that he always fought to get the best for junior sports on the Gold Coast, and he was an all-round great fellow, and he'll be really sadly missed by the Gold Coast community.
Second to Councillor Gail O'Neill. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. Could you please record Councillor O'Neill? Thank you. Next one is Merrill Minute. Is none. Next item 4, confirmation of minutes. Councillor Gates, you have some correction?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, that's on the planning agenda.
On planning, okay. Any other correction? Anyone? Anyone like to move for adoption? Councillor Gates, seconder, Councillor Pauline Young. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. I'm just going to change my screen. Oh, that's better.
Fogging up. Keep fogging up. You're lucky you don't wear glasses. They fog.
story.
Okay. Okay. We've adopted minutes. Okay, we're good. Mayor's report then. Councillor, item 5, Mayor's report. There's quite a bit there, but I'll give you an executive version. Myself, Councillor Gates, Owen Jones, Councillor Patterson, Belden Lumsden, Councillor Taylor, Pauline Young, Councillor McDonald and Councillor O'Neill attended the announcement of the successful 2032 Olympic bid. Oh, there it is. Okay. It was live at Corowa Park, and I said on the night that without doubt that the culmination of the work through our volunteers and organising of the successful 2018 Commonwealth Games made this a reality. From there we went to the Sports Accord, where all the heads of sports were here at the same at Corowa, and from there they understand that Southeast Queensland 2032 would be a wonderful place to run an Olympic and Paralympic Games. And without further ado, we all celebrate our co-hosting of the 2032 Olympic Games. Wonderful. So, next one, land gifting ceremony at Coomera Lakesland Conservation Area. I attend with Councillor Owen Jones. Can I invite you to just explain how significant that one is, Councillor Owen Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The developers of Serenity 4212 have contributed a fairly substantial parcel of land which will be added to the Coomera wetlands. So in total, I think it's now over 1,200 hectares of conservation land. So far better use for it than the original golf course that it was proposed for in the 80s, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Just another way that we're generous at heart and to keep increasing our green and open space. Some say we're the greenest regional council in all the land, but I won't go that far. Greater Southern Gold Coast Chamber of Commerce post-budget luncheon. So it was wonderful to be there with Councillor Neil and Councillor Taylor. We spoke about the all sorts of infrastructure, and the elephant in the room was light rail all the way to the airport and Coolangatta, and without doubt the support was there for that wonderful project. So did you want to add anything further, Councillor O'Neill?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think the business community was quite grateful that we were there talking about recovery, and also we did mention that we have for the second year not charging for outside dining licences, and they thought that was great too. But I really think it was just an air of optimism.
Yeah. Right, then from there, announcement of Asia Pacific Screen Award, and so basically it started here on the Gold Coast, and it's come back again, and a photo there at Hodder with famous actors and famous people. David Wenham, Cliff Curtis, and Tracy Vieira from Screen Queensland. And if you get the opportunity to go to the function there, I recommend it. It's such a diverse number of diverse region of films and ideas that get celebrated. Then we launched the Active and Healthy Wellness Cancer Program. This year is with a difference. I attended 11th Avenue Community Space in Palm Beach together with Councillor McDonald. And this is about, everyone knows we do about 200 free or low-cost active and health activities throughout the city each week. Where this one is first time in our city, and I think it's first time in Australia, is the cancer support, water therapy, and chronic disease management, and to get people hope and get them health and active again. Councillor McDonald, you want to add to that on the wellness program?
Mr Mayor, look, I think that this program is really great for the Gold Coast, and thank you for coming down to Palm Beach and launching this valuable activity. And I'm sure that the community will benefit greatly for these sort of activities. We have a really good service there with the active and healthy lifestyle throughout the Gold Coast.
Yeah. And then we go to Gold Coast IT Forum Breakfast. And basically, the IT Forum is getting together and formulating again. And I was articulating that our dark fibre throughout the city, I think it's a 99 kilometres ring around our city, and that it's the IT superhighway. And what I used, one fibre, can't remember the number of gigabyte, I think 95 gigabyte per second, but I bring it into the terms I can understand. Literally, in 5 seconds, you can download in that one fibre, in 5 seconds, the high definition Hollywood movie. And we have, that's 5 seconds on one fibre, and we have 862 fibre in the one. So as a council, we have absolutely laid the infrastructure platform, and the idea for this is for the IT industry to understand and really light up those dark fibres. And so let's see what happens. A lot more work to be doing in marketing and encouraging. And where there is someone out there wanting to do a joint venture, I think we should be open for business and see how we can get cash flow income out of this project. Tour of Northern Gold Coast business. I was there with Councillor Hamill and went through so many Yatla Enterprise. What I take away from that is that it's thriving over the years there, and I think in our town plan we better look at where else we can have light industrial such as Yatla Enterprise to be expanded or created. I think that's just one of those things. And then we go to Southport Chamber of Commerce, business after dark at Hodder up the top there. It's an exhibitionist bar, and I think the comment for Hodder from Southport is that they feel like it's not far away from Southport, and this is really part of it. And the vibe was good, so it was a good night for all. And then Councillor Tozer and I was at the Mudgee Bar Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and that we spoke about I spoke overall on the city budget and the infrastructure opportunity for the Olympic announcement, and Councillor Tozer spoke about local projects, what he intends to deliver. Did you want to add further on that? Okay. And then Lyrical Landscapes, the Art of William Robinson exhibition that was curated by Dame Quinton Bryce, and I'd say turnout magnificent. If any of you hasn't been to it, you need some relaxation time, spirit uplifting, colour in times of COVID. Take your mask with you, sit and relax and absorb. They will not be able to get William Robinson lyrical landscape put together again. It came from all parts of the world, and I'd say with Dame Quentin, she made a few phone calls to get those artwork to be part of the exhibition. So just across the road, I recommend it to you, and you can order a book with all those artwork in it, so you can have something forever. I've placed an order, so I pass it on to you and all the viewers out there. Olympic gold medal, congratulations to all Olympians. In particular, was wonderful to see Logan Martin and winning his BMX Tokyo. All of you know that we replicated the track at Carrara Stadium there, and I asked Logan, I said, what does that mean? He goes, well, normally you go to the Olympics, you get about 2 days to practice on the track. Here, he had 6 weeks before he went to the main track itself. And there's a little clip, it's only a self, but it come from the heart of Logan. So is the clip ready we can play? Play it.
What's going on, guys? I'm super stoked. I won the gold medal. Everyone's a freestyle max. Thank you to all you guys behind the scenes, building the course, Gold Coast Council, QAS. Head on. What's going on, guys? I'm super stoked. I won the gold medal. Thanks everyone for freestyle BMX. Thank you to all you guys behind the scenes, building the course, Gold Coast Council, QAS. Head on in securing this medal. I'm super grateful for that. To have you guys behind us, and this one's for you guys. Woo!
I told you it was raw, but yeah, but it's great that he just did it and sent the message to all of us here. So on Councillor McDonald.
Mr Mayor, could I just add to young Keegan Palmer
Yes.
with skateboarding with a gold medal. Even though he's a resident of Division 14, Keegan did a lot of work over at the skateboard bowl over at Eleonora. I've been connected with Regan for a number of years. He and his dad had come in to see me, and as we know, the skateboard bowl at over at Eleonora is one of a kind, and I hope that that sort of put a lot of training in for Keegan for his wonderful gold medal win.
And that was another touching part. They're all. I think someone wrote that as Gold Coast with gold numbers, we're in the top 20 or something in the world, something like that. I just went quite incredible. But anyway. In 3 years, France, so got to start polishing up my school French. No, it's wonderful for our city, and I've asked the CEOs there. I know there's COVID and all that. If there's an opportunity, we can hold us as a civic function to congratulate and our Olympians. So. On the Gold Coast, the last time we did that was at the Turf Club, and it was fantastic. They said they waited, they did the signature, people lined up. So we look at the logistics of that. If we can make it happen again, it'd be wonderful. So we got another 14 days of Paralympics. They come back to quarantine, so about a month, because we want to celebrate both Olympians and Paralympians. And so, Mr. CEO, if you can take it on board and see if we can make it happen, and if any of you got contacts at the Turf Club, might be good. We might do it at the same place. Councillor Owen Jones.
Mr Mayor, we've got a lovely versatile outdoor space that we might be able to use.
Okay, that might even be better. So anyway, whatever we can do there, that'll be good.
If we can afford it.
All right. I don't see any dissent from that. Councillor Peter Young.
Good morning, Mr Mayor. Do you mind if I say a couple of words about Logan?
Yes, please.
Thank you. there was a complaint about the skate ramp that Mr Martin had built in the back of his property at Maudsley a couple of years ago, and it gathered a fair bit of support from a few of the locals, and so we held a public meeting in the park, and Logan, to his credit, came along, although he knew he was the subject of their concern, the residents' concerns, and we were able to resolve that matter. There was no special dispensation given to Logan Martin, but there was certainly recognition of the fact that he was already world champion at that point, and that he'd built this fabulous ramp in his backyard, and he was a very honourable guy and has dealt with his neighbours in an honourable way, and I'm sure all the people out in Maudsley there are just stoked with his success for himself and his family and for the city. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Sweet. Okay. Next one, not as, well, it might be exciting, online education exchange with students from Taiwan. So I'm just speaking a bit of Chinese there. No, we just got to keep our students from overseas online, supportive, so that when we've got a pathway to get out of this pandemic, and when this study Gold Coast gets going again, we've just got to be ready. But the friendship doesn't start like a switch. In other words, when pandemic's over, then we become friends again. The continuation of the dialogue should continue to happen now, especially to all our sister city. And it doesn't bother me if they're in Taiwan, or my next Zoom call is with Israel. And so friendship really is what we've got to espouse and learn of each other. Then we have Time magazine, the world 100 greatest place, 2021, and they wrote about us, and I won't get into full detail, but suffice to say that having our art and culture precinct and our light rail has added to the livability and the culture and the lifestyle. That's the envy of not just Australia but the rest of the world, and we're the only Australian city to be mentioned on that list. Wow. This list doesn't include the ranking, it just lists 100 of it, but I know we're probably number one. Councillors, I move that the Mayor's report be welcome and noted. Seconder, Councillor Gates, put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried. Clarification, Mr CEO, any clarification? None. Okay. Item 7, business arising from the minutes. Any business arising from the minutes? Nil. Presentation? No presentation. Anyone? No. Conflict of interest declaration? None? Not on this part? Okay. Then we go to reception of committee minutes, economic tourism events. I'll go to Councillor Castro.
It's the first time I've had star billing, Mr Mayor. Kicking off the...
You have.
Mr Mayor, I move the report of the Economy, Tourism and Events Committee meeting, which was held on the 4th of August 2021, covered by recommendations 1 to 5 be received. Okay.
Seconder, Councillor Tozer. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against?
There is no
motion
conflict.
carried. Any items you want to deal separately? Councillor Castro.
Move for adoption, Mr Mayor, please.
Seconder, Councillor Tozer. Put the motion to... Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong?
I simply wanted to understand one.
Okay.
No. Well, it's actually item. Sorry, Mr Mayor. It's actually item 6. So we do have to say 1 to 6.
If we don't have the we don't actually have conflicts. I thought we don't count that as a...
Well, it's just confusing. I want to unstar number 6, if I may, just to vote against it, Mr Mayor.
Okay, we'll do 6, okay, and then I'll come back to you.
Yes.
Any objection with that? No, we'll go straight to 6. So we just move, you move 6? Seconder, Councillor Castro. Want to speak for it?
Program and
Okay. Okay. Against anyone? Speaking against, Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the City, I think, quite sensibly has an investment attraction program that seeks to attract the best and brightest and perhaps more importantly, the most promising businesses to the Gold Coast in the hope that they offer us the opportunity to deliver high-paying jobs for locals and, importantly, establish a base from which other businesses can establish and create even more opportunity for young Gold Coasters. I can't talk much about this specific opportunity because it is, of course, a confidential item, and I wouldn't want to prejudice the interests of this business specifically. But, Mr Mayor, in reviewing the value proposition and seeing the makeup of the roles that would potentially be brought to the city, I wasn't personally satisfied that we'd be delivering on our aspiration to create those high-paying, knowledge-based jobs specifically. Unfortunately, as I said, I can't say much more, but I think there may have been an opportunity to ensure that much more of the knowledge that could be created through this opportunity was ultimately owned and captured here on the Gold Coast rather than elsewhere. Thank you.
Anyone speak for? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's really important that when we address the investment attraction program in the Health and Knowledge Precinct, we recognise that it is under some very different aims and objectives to what we've identified in other business investment attraction programs. In our requirements here, it isn't about necessarily specific jobs of locals in the immediate future. That is not one of our aims and objectives. If we want that to be, then we need to address and alter the aims and objectives of the program. I would suggest that this completely meets the aims and objectives of the program, which is to attract international expertise of very special clinical and academic nature that creates the reasons why more and more of these very specialist businesses are choosing the Gold Coast. So it is under a different kind of regime, and in terms of the targets that we've got for this program, this fully meets that, and I'm delighted to support it. Thank you.
Speak against the motion, Councillor Gates.
Mr Mayor, I'll be very brief, given it's a closed item, but I had major concerns about the return on investment that was advised on this investment of ratepayers' funding, and the fact that normally when this amount of money is allocated, it generates a lot of jobs for locals in our city, and I don't believe this project is going to do that at all. So that's just an explanation of why I'm not supportive of this one.
Thank you. Speaking for Councillor Tozer, you'd like to close?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, this matter was addressed at some length in the committee meeting, and a representative of the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct came in and provided some information to the committee in order for us to form the view that we did, which was to recommend a support as the motion talks about. But in order to make my point soundly, I'm just going to read an amended version of the conclusion of the report that councillors were provided. The successful attraction of this company to the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct will add another high-growth potential company to the local economy, providing job creation, innovation through local research and development projects, and increased international connections for the Gold Coast. That's just the first sentence. I'm absolutely comfortable about the thresholds and measures that are set in our program to make sure that these incentives provided to a company like this to relocate its headquarters here
will actually be able to be delivered. We'll be able to hold that company to account and make sure that any ratepayers' monies, in Councillor Gates' word, allocated to this company actually does meet the thresholds that are part of our investment attraction program. No company gets money without a set of requirements and the economic outcomes that are expected and reputational outcomes that are expected with the relocation of this business to our city will be good, and not just good, but entirely in line with the aspirations of the Health and Knowledge Precinct. I do hope the Council supports the motion before us.
Okay. Councillors, debate's closed. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Carried. You'd like your name recorded, Councillor Gates? In the negative, yeah? Anyone else? Councillor Vorster, anyone else? All good. Okay. Councillor Castro.
Report of the Economy, Tourism and Events Committee recommendations be adopted with the exception of item 6, which was specifically resolved.
Seconder, Councillor Tozer. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. Right. We now go to 10.2, Planning and Environment. Councillor Caldwell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move that the report of the Planning and Environment Committee meeting held on the 5th of August 2021, covered by recommendations 1 to 9, be received.
Seconder, Councillor Gates. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. We'll deal with items 5, 7 and 8.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, I have a correction for the minutes before we adopt them.
The minutes, yeah, okay. Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On page 13 of the minutes, in 2.6, which was a declaration that I made, there was an error in the box that required the matters, the subject of the application and submission. It needs to be deleted. I'm sorry that it's difficult for the minute secretary, unless she has a copy of the minutes, to make the necessary change, but I can provide it to her at the conclusion of the meeting. There's 2 corrections to be made on that page number 13. The removal of the Middleton Street Ashmore description and a change to the other entity's interest, but I will provide it to you for correction.
Page 13, is it?
It's only one tower.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, I've confused you now. We just now have to vote on adopting the minutes.
Let's adopt this. Anyone want to move the adoption of the minutes with the change? Move, Councillor Gates. Seconder, Councillor Tozer. Anyone want to speak against? Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. All right. Okay. What we'll do item 5, 7 and 8 first, and I'll go to Councillor Gates and I'll come back. Councillor Gates.
Described conflicts of interest on items 5, 7 and 8 that will be on the screen of the minutes, and I will be leaving the room and not participating in any way.
Okay.
So,
just before you leave, I just want it on the screen first in case there's any. Not just deal one at a time. Mr. CEO, do you want me to do item 3 first? All right, well, can you go to 3 and then we'll come back? Should better go to 3 since it's the first one off the rank, isn't it? I think it's a good time to have a break. All right, so don't forget mask, social distancing. Mr. CEO, how about 10 minutes we come back? All right. Oh, we good. Thank you. All right. Mr. CEO, you ready? All right, here we go. So, I'd like to go to item 5 first. And when we left off, we were trying to find this conflict of interest. And Councillor Gates?
That's correct, Mr Mayor. Is this item 3 or 5? 5. So we're back on item 5. But, Mr Mayor, I have other conflicts on...
Can just do this one first.
You want me to go through them?
No, just do the one that, item 5 you have
Item 5,
on the screen, and at the end of it...
I also have a prescribed conflict of interest.
Yeah, at the end of this one, go down the bottom, no, go back too far, was it?
No, keep going, keep going. Sorry, so there's a prescribed conflict of interest from a donation from Arcadis, which requires me not to participate, Mr Mayor, so I'll be leaving the room.
That's table. No, just next one, item 7. Because when you're out of the room for 5, I'm going to go to 7.
Okay, so the special delegations were carried out over our recess period when we were in our community consultation. So these have all been approved by or refused, whichever way, but I'm still required to make the declaration and leave the room while the matter is accepted by council. So while you're out for 5, stay out while we're doing 7. And then there's item 8 as well.
Okay, let's go to 8. On the screen.
No, that's 2.8. Item 8 we need to go to, please. Item 8, this is the one. And this is a prescribed conflict of interest due to a donation from Home Corp, and also Sunland is involved in that one, which was brought to my attention at the meeting. So I'll be leaving the room and not participating in the discussion, Mr Mayor. So I'll now depart.
Okay.
Mr Mayor.
Just
Sorry, Mr Mayor, just to let you know that I have a declaration in regards to item 8 as well, and I intend to leave the room when we get to 8.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move the committee recommendation. No, that's fine, Mr Mayor.
Against? Motion carried. We now move to item 7. Councillor Caldwell.
Yep, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move that.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, just a thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to interject. Mr Mayor, at committee, I flagged with committee members that my wife and I, and my wife being both my wife and an electoral donor from a jointly held bank account, own an investment property in Palm Beach. I wanted to put that on the table because it's essentially a new development in case any, not that it is in a new development, but it's a change in my circumstances, and I wanted to flag that with all member councillors in case there were any questions on that, or whether anyone wished to move a procedural motion to manage any perception related to that purchase. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Tozer.
Mr Mayor, can I ask a question of Councillor Vorster about the matter? Firstly, yes. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Of the matters that we're dealing with today, what's the proximity of the home that's been purchased and the locations in each of the applications relevant to Palm Beach?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I can't provide exact distances, but what I can do is perhaps provide Councillor Tozer with some context. Item 6, the report concerning item 6 includes in it a series of maps with notable nearby developments, and our investment property, which is a single unit in a larger community title scheme, appears on the periphery of those maps. Not even the whole property is contained in those maps, and that is the... So on that basis, I sought some advice from the city solicitor, who advised that I did not have a declarable conflict of interest because my wife and I do not have an interest in the matter that was being decided by council, and certainly made no submission whatsoever. The other Palm Beach items to be considered by committee and that were considered by committee and will be considered by council today are even further away than item 6, wherein I was provided that advice from the city solicitor.
It occurs to me what you've provided is that that you're not depicted on any map for item 7, but in item 6 you're depicted on the map, but only partially. You're so far away from the subject property that it's kind of on the periphery of the map. Am I relaying that correctly?
That's correct, Mr. Mann. Through you to Councillor Tozer, would you like to refer me to a specific page again? I just missed that.
491.
491. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The property, or the whole community title scheme, is obscured by the white pop-out, which is on the top left-hand corner of the map, if that provides you with sufficient detail.
I'll probably ask the city solicitor for advice here. I think there's been enough information provided for me to move that I don't believe that what's been disclosed prevents Councillor Vorster from participating in the meeting, but if that's not necessary, maybe the city solicitor could provide some advice to us about that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as Councillor Vorster pointed out, I had given him advice that he didn't need to make a declaration, and he hasn't in fact done that today. He just wanted to vent the issue with you all to give you the opportunity to raise a concern if you had anything. So if you don't have a concern, no need to do anything else.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Caldwell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Vorster had also provided that information to committee, so we proceeded on a certain basis in that meeting as well. So particularly, and obviously it's important that we turn our minds to the conflict that might arise on each individual set of circumstances. So particularly with item 7, for example, it's wrapping up previously decided matters that were during the recess period. So there's not a decision being made today, we're just noting it. And so I'm very happy to move that as...
Seconder, Councillor Pauline Young. Anyone to speak against? Councillor Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, in the special delegation, there's 2 items that are in relation to Palm Beach, and it was discussed at the committee meeting, and the director raised that they had the deputy mayor and the director had attended the South East Queensland Planning Committee, and it had been raised there by other councils about the time frame, that then instead of coming to council, what happens? It has to be dealt under special delegation. I have written to the director asking for a copy of the minutes of those meetings, because I think this is very important, that obviously what applicants are doing are bypassing the system in the time frame, and I hope that we can address that.
Director, you're taking on notice and make sure the information flows.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor McDonald, I did send you an email back this morning. The state government have advised there's not technically minutes coming out from that workshop, so because it was a workshop style, but certainly if I get any summarised notes I can forward through to all councillors.
Thank you. Right. Councillor. We go to 8. Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's the declaration I made in committee in regards to Sunland, and I intend to leave the room.
Okay. Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, I'm rising now to repeat some comments that I made at committee, which was to draw councillors' attention to the fact that this development has, as a party to it, both Sunland and Home Corp, whose, I suppose you'd call figureheads or spokespeople, have in earlier times criticised some of my public comments, but those comments were tied to the prospects of my re-election. And given that I was re-elected, I consider those comments well and truly extinguished, and certainly have had a track record of voting on all development matters objectively and on their merits. I just wanted to flag that with councillors today in case there were any questions that councillors had or they felt compelled to act on that information procedurally. I wouldn't ordinarily do it, but for the fact that both Home Corp and Sunland are mentioned here.
Paul.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move that item, and if I have a seconder, I'll speak to it briefly.
Seconder, Councillor Pauline Young.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of matters that had been raised following committee, and councillors will have been in receipt of a memorandum from the Manager of City Development, which deals with a few of those matters that were raised. I think it's particularly important to note that there was just some clarification in relation to the actual number of bedrooms that had been referred to in the report. So the reference to a total of 407 bedrooms was an error, and as we had determined at committee, the actual number of bedrooms is 381. Obviously that makes a big difference to the way in which car parking allocation numbers are made together with density, etc. So on that basis, I think that just tidies up that loose end. There was also some content provided in relation to the matters of the varying types of uses that could be contained within that building. Nothing for action today necessarily, but good information for future work. And in moving this, I would just like to acknowledge the work of the local councillor, Councillor Barden Lumsden, who has taken a keen interest in making sure that his residents in the nearby area are well served by appropriate car parking numbers, and I think we particularly delved into that in quite a great amount of detail at committee, and I think on balance we are satisfied that this is an improved development outcome compared to the original application that had been made, with a greater proportion of car parking, particularly the visitor parking at grade, and I think this will be a welcome change to the Labrador skyline there in what has been traditionally an iconic location because it was known for being the home of KFC. This will be, this is a site which has been long expected to house some sort of residential tower, and I think this, having been through the detail of this at Planning Committee, I think worthy of our support.
Okay. Anyone speak against the motion? Councillor Corwell, can I close this?
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. Officers, could you ask Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor Gates to return? Okay, Councillor, we'll go to item 3. Councillor Tozer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just need to make a conflict of interest declaration, which was not provided to councillors in our summary book prior. I've just missed it. I'd corresponded with this Office of the City Solicitor before about this matter, but hadn't filled out the necessary form. So I've done that this morning, and I'll just read that if you are okay with that.
Yeah.
So in relation to item 3, my wife and I are pursuant to sections 150 EQ 3B and 150 EQ 3C of the Local Government Act. I hereby provide notice that of a declarable conflict of interest in this matter, the nature and particulars of which are as follows. My wife and I own a home at 44 Moonbeam Parade, and the item refers to an application for a 2-lot subdivision in that street about 200 metres away from my property. It's not depicted on any maps, but it's close enough for me to, there may be a perception, particularly in the way that I will propose to debate against the matter.
Okay. I'll go to our solicitor. Is that just bring it to notice, or is that deemed to be a declaration?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Tozer is making a declaration, so we need to deal with it, and we had a quick discussion about the declaration beforehand, okay. And I think it's appropriate.
So what did you want to do at the... I can't see the...
Oh, Mr Mayor, I would seek your permission to make a decision on the matter. I would like to participate in decision-making and debate.
Okay. All right. I can't see it. Yeah. All right, so there it is. Okay. Any procedural motion, anyone?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I ask a couple of questions?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, just have 2 questions for Councillor Tozer to satisfy my thinking. The first is, through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Tozer. I note that you have an intention to speak against it, but during the course of debate, will you maintain an open and persuadable mind during discussion? Yes. Well, yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I know it might sound as almost a facetious question to ask, but I think it's, for the sake of transparency, it's important for us to establish the basis in which a councillor may participate on a DA matter in the street. So I want to ask that question just so everyone knows what my thinking is and perhaps the thinking of others. Mr Mayor, my second question is through you to the City Solicitor. My understanding is that once a related party or a councillor themselves becomes a submitter into a process, that then we shift from a declarable to perhaps a prescribed conflict of interest. Through you, Mr Mayor, to the City Solicitor, were you satisfied in your correspondence with Councillor Tozer to date that he had appropriately attempted to manage his conflict and hadn't engaged in city officers in a way that may have been seen as a submission into the matter?
Through you, Mr Mayor, unfortunately the declaration was raised just before the council meeting started, so Councillor Tozer and I haven't had that opportunity to have a more detailed discussion about the process leading up to the matter getting here today. But I think the nature of your questions would be appropriate to put to Councillor Tozer.
Yeah, I'll answer that. Thank you,
Mr Mayor, through you to Councillor Tozer. Councillor Tozer, are you of the view that you have sought to temper your involvement in the matter until Council could resolve today whether your participation is appropriate and in the public interest? Thank you.
So, Mr Mayor, the answer to that question is that throughout all of my correspondence in relation to this matter, I have copied in the councillor conflict box and also the director to make sure that I am being transparent about it. But the reason that I made a submission is because I was one of 164 properties that were provided correspondence from the stormwater area of our council, and that information I thought was pertinent, and I sought appropriate questions around that whilst also making relevant declarations through that process. At no time during that process was I advised that my provision of information and questions about that information put me in a position where I was, unable to or prejudiced my position. Yeah. That's my understanding. But
yeah. So, Mr Mayor, from what I understand of the function of the legislation, which is, as you know, is a fraught thing for any of us to navigate. But I would expect that if there is a formal submission into a matter, then we may reach the threshold of a prescribed conflict of interest. And I suppose I just want to tease this out because although Councillor Tozer said that he had made a submission, it doesn't sound as though he actually made a submission.
No, I didn't. I asked some questions of the director and put that in writing and copied the relevant mailbox in to make sure that that correspondence was able to be reviewed by an accountable person or a person who might hold me to account to make sure that I was doing it transparently and properly.
So, Mr Mayor, through you perhaps to Director Swain, are you satisfied that the engagement by the councillor on this matter did not constitute a formal submission into the development assessment process?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Vorster, yes I am, and it also is a code accessible application too.
Okay, then I'm satisfied, but I think it's just important we had that conversation, Mr Mayor, because it protects everyone's interests. Thank you.
Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the Director. On page 127 of the agenda, there is section 8, which is public notification. So even though it's code accessible, officers usually identify in that section whether or not public submissions may have been made, and there's none noted here. So I'm assuming that the correspondence from Gold Coast Water that Councillor Tozer referred to, his words were that he made a submission, wasn't a submission in regards to a planning matter. Would that be correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Owen-Jones, that's correct. From my recollection, it was just an email to me seeking some clarification on some matters.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Corwell.
I'm happy to move that Councillor Tozer should participate in the decision despite the councillor's conflict of interest because the public interest is...
Because
the what, sorry? Well, the public interest is served by Councillor Tozer participating in the matter. And that outweighs any perceived conflict that might exist. There was some standard wording around that, but
that's good enough.
If someone seconds it, I'll speak to it briefly.
Second to Councillor Vorster.
Mr Mayor, just briefly, I mean, I think this is a very difficult matter because under the current regime of conflicts, it obviously doesn't reach a material personal conflict or whatever that higher level is. And Councillor Tozer has today done the right thing in bringing the matter to our attention. I think where possible we all want to make sure that councillors can remain in the room as long as the public interest is ultimately served by that occurring. And I'm satisfied that here, Councillor Tozer, as a long-term resident of Mudgeeraba and of this street, probably has some local knowledge that he would like to input to the meeting, and it would be a shame if he couldn't do that because he'd been elected as the local councillor. And so on the basis that I think the public interest is outweighs, the public interest is greater for him to remain in the room than to not remain in the room, and on that basis I have moved the motion.
Okay. Anyone speak against the motion? Councillor Jones.
Mr Mayor, I'd just like, if I could ask Councillor Tozer 2 questions. So, Councillor Tozer, my understanding is some of the concerns for this particular application have been in regards to the management of a catchment. So, my first question is, are you at the top of the catchment or at the bottom of the catchment?
At the top.
Yep, thank you. And to the best of your knowledge, at your house, you've got all of your stormwater going to the correct its discharge point?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone speak against the motion? Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands.
Councillor Tate, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Colwell, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Young, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Barr-Lumsden, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Vorster, and not sure how Councillor Hamill's voting.
In favour, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hamill.
And against? Did not vote, Councillor Gates and Councillor Tozer. Motion carried. Right, we'll go back to the matter. Councillor Gates.
To also declare a conflict of interest, a declarable conflict of interest, which was made at committee for item 3, relating to donations from BC Curry in 2008 and 2011. I'm seeking permission to participate in the decision-making on this item, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move the same procedural motion as I did at committee, which was to permit Councillor Gates to participate in the matter and in the vote, given the significant amount of time that has elapsed between the donation and today's decision, and also given the very remote nature of that gift from the matter at hand.
On the screen, seconder Councillor Owen Jones. Anyone speak against? Put the motion to you or in favour, show of hands.
Councillor Tate, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Barr-Lumsden, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Vorster, and ask how Councillor Hamill's voted, Mr Mayor.
In favour, Mr Mayor.
And Councillor Hamill.
Okay. Against?
Councillor Peter Young.
Motion carried. Did not vote, Councillor Gates and Councillor Tozer. Right, let's deal with the matter. Item 3. Councillor Caldwell.
I'm happy to move the committee recommendation, Mr Mayor.
Seconder, Councillor Owen Jones. You want to speak further on that, Councillor Caldwell?
I won't open, but I'm interested in hearing what Councillor Tozer's contribution will be, and if my debate closing is good enough, then his open and persuadable mind may jump the fence, but we'll see.
Speaking against, Councillor Tozer.
What I'm going to say is best described as speaking against, although I want to start by suggesting that I did ask some reasonable questions of officers in relation to this matter and received very professional answers, and that all of my questions in relation to the matter prior to this meeting we're in right now have been helpful and informative to me. The reason that I wanted to raise I'll speak against the matter is because I was one of 164 properties that received a letter from the City of Gold Coast as a local resident, and the letter says or informs locals, these 164 residents, that inspections are scheduled to occur in this suburb area between the 12th of April 2021 and the 12th of July 2021. And it relates to the wording that I'm reading word for word in this letter, which is clearly in the public domain. It's been sent to residents. During heavy wet weather events, unwanted stormwater can enter the City of Gold Coast sewerage network. This can result in the network being overloaded and sewage possibly spilling into streets, parklands, waterways, or in the worst case, within a private property. Whilst the City manages this issue by maintaining the City-owned sewerage network through asset inspections, repairs and renewals programs, as well as cleaning and disinfecting spills, evidence has shown that stormwater can enter through illegal and incorrect connections at private properties. Your suburb has been identified as having a high inflow of stormwater during wet weather. The letter goes on to explain a number of different options that property owners in the area can engage with council on in order to minimise the risk of the situation that's described, which I'll just repeat: the network being overloaded and sewage possibly spilling into streets, parklands, waterways, or in the worst case, within a private property. As you might imagine, as a property owner in this area, I was a bit concerned about this. I don't know. I'm not a stormwater engineer or a drainage engineer, and it caused me some concern. It definitely caused my wife some concern. We are at the upper end of the catchment, so this is not something that we've observed. But some 18 months ago or thereabouts, I visited a property owner who is at the lower end of the catchment. And unfortunately, after a heavy wet weather event, there was toilet paper on her front yard. And it wasn't from her house. And that was a very difficult time, difficult circumstance to deal with this property owner, who was very accommodating and understood that there'd been a very heavy wet weather event. It was best described as a flood, or it was a heavy rainfall event. And the network of stormwater drains and sewage drains was configured such that her property was subject to this situation occurring. Having some compassion for this woman, we tried to work with the stormwater team, and they were really helpful. Gold Coast Water did a great job of trying to manage the expectations of this resident. And one of the things they did was they instituted a valve a bit further up the network, so it diverted what might be the overflow during this heavy rainfall event through a different configuration or network, so that if there was going to be an overflow, it wasn't going to happen in this person's private property, and it was going to be configured differently. And in stormwater networks that are older, and in that particular area that might be 40 years, 50 years old, some of the stormwater network in that area, that configuration of valves and diversions needs to be tested. But unfortunately, we don't control the rain, Mr Mayor. So we can only really test it when another heavy rainfall event occurs. All of this was relayed to planning officers and Al White in the team that deals with this, and it talks about this area being known as a hotspot. It's actually Dominic Kieran's who's written to me here, and the hotspots refer to an area where this, across the city, where this sometimes occurs. And the advice that Dominic provided to me was that currently the city has committed a hydraulic analysis of the local network to determine a suitable approach to redirect the spill point to a location that is considered to have a lower risk of causing harm to the community. In this case, it involved installing a reflux valve in the network. As you can appreciate, the city is required to be prudent with expense, and therefore the methodology used to manage hotspots to undertake engineering assessment and implement mitigation measures which are low cost. And there's lots of big words in there that talks about, but basically what it says is that we instituted a valve, we hope that it works, but we're not sure if it will. Now, I can assure you that the next heavy rainfall event, this woman's property didn't flood, but I'm not sure if the problem has been solved entirely. And the reason I raise it with you today is because when I raised it with the planning officers, the director very clearly outlined for me that this matter wasn't subject to the application. The Planning Act had a set of different provisions that only had to manage stormwater and sewerage in normal events, not heavy rainfall events. But I have compassion for the 164 properties that received this correspondence, and the fact that this development application has been lodged, and all they're going to see is the development application and a letter saying there's a risk of sewage in my front yard. And I appreciate that's not necessarily exactly what might happen, but it's clearly a risk that's happened, and I've observed a property where that has happened. And so I can't support the application. I appreciate the Planning Act and Ms Swain's response to me. In response to my question today, we've had a good look at this, and despite the inflow management issues mentioned below, development applications must continue to be assessed and decided as per the requirements of the Planning Act. Where development applications comply with the relevant assessment benchmarks of the city, they ought to be approved. In the case of code-assessable applications, they must be approved where they comply with the relevant assessment benchmarks. And that's why the recommendation from officers has been for approval, and that's, I'd suggest, why the committee has recommended approval as well. But as the local councillor who has observed the network work that's going on, the undertaking of valve configurations to reduce risk, but still not being certain that we've stopped this from occurring, I can't add a development application that could only increase burden in heavy rainfall events. There's a roof, it will increase the amount of water that goes into the stormwater network instead of soaking into the earth, and I just can't in good faith represent my residents' interests by supporting this, notwithstanding the entitlement and obligations we have under the Planning Act. Mr Mayor, I feel terribly troubled about the information that I have, and I remain with an open and persuadable mind if someone can give me some reason why we should do it, but I just, in good conscience, having shook this resident's hand as we observed toilet paper on her front lawn, I can't approve a development application that increases the network until I can be absolutely certain that that problem has been rectified, and I can't be certain at this time.
Okay, speaking for go ahead. Question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through to the Director or whoever it may need to answer the question. This particular development, will it make the problem worse by approving it, or will it? Is there going to be a worsening of the problem, even if it hasn't been fixed at this particular stage?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Taylor, that's not my understanding. And I think the issue is that there's a number of illegal connections in the area that our teams, in conjunction with Water and Waste, are working through as well.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It was the point I was going to make. On page 119 of the agenda, it stresses that the problems with stormwater are related to illegally discharged water in this location. The next page clarifies that there is sufficient capacity to support the proposed development and no concerns about the one additional lot. At the Planning Committee, I did ask the question of the Director to ensure that Water and Waste are, or whomever is responsible for checking the illegal connections, is in the process of doing so, because once the illegal connections are resolved, then the system has capacity to do what it needs to do. So I would imagine the letters that were distributed were, and please tell me if I'm not correct here, but, well, perhaps I'll frame it as a question, were the letters that Councillor Tozer referred to distributed in order to carry out inspections of the properties to make sure that all of the illegal connections are captured?
Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Gates, I haven't seen the letter that Councillor Tozer is referring to, so I'm happy to take a copy of that now and have a quick read. And
well, that's fine, but
who authored it? Is it you or Water and Waste?
Gold Coast Water.
Gold Coast Water.
It has a lot of correspondence.
Yeah, sure.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Owen Jones.
Mr Mayor, I think it's the formal advice the city is required to issue to landowners that there's going to be a property inspection so that they can enter the property and do the inspection. And this is part of a stormwater management process that's been happening across the city. And the first pilot was in Monterey Keys, where we had similar type of stormwater connections into the sewer system, creating some concerns for residents. So I think that the 163 or 4 letters is for each of the registered property owners in the catchment, and it effectively authorises the city officers to enter the property to do those inspections.
Okay. I'll take your speech as speaking for. Did you want to add further to that, Councillor Gates?
No, thanks, Mr.
All right. Speaking against the motion, then Councillor Corwell, your chance to close.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I think it's very important for us to reflect carefully on these types of issues that have been raised by Councillor Tozer. My thoughts are actually that he has done his job as the local councillor in having brought the original issue to the attention of council officers when that incident occurred, because quite clearly there has been action taken by the relevant council department to ensure that that issue is attended to and hopefully rectified. It would seem to me that the issue actually lies with the other 163 properties that received the notice, not this particular one where we are contemplating today's application. And so I hope that we can actually attend to whatever illegal connections there might be on those other properties so as to not prejudice the individual property rights of this particular applicant to make this application and to have it decided without the lens of those other issues which really shouldn't be brought into consideration today. So I've heard what Councillor Tozer has said. I thank him for bringing it to our attention, but I'm quite satisfied that the issues can be dealt with separately. We know that the sewerage system, in theory, should be a closed system, but it's not. It's not perfect, due usually to a slippage in time of the sort of illegal connections that have clearly been identified in this street. But they are something that I know that Gold Coast Water are working to try and claw back to the perfect operating condition that they should be in, which would mean that there is plenty of capacity in this particular network to ensure that we can give this approval. And so on that basis, notwithstanding that the issue is one of concern, particularly to the down the hill, shall we say, I I think we've got no choice but to approve this particular application.
The debate's closed. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. You want it recorded?
So, do you mind if I ask a question on notice for the officers relating to this matter?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Could councillors be furnished with, or my office particularly, a list of the 164 properties and in each instance whether an illegal stormwater connection has been identified?
Take it on notice. Okay.
Thank you.
And record Councillor Tozer voted in the negative. Motion carried. Item 3 is done. Any other items, councillors, to deal separately? Councillor Peter Young.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Item 4, hopefully less contentious amongst ourselves. This deals with the change of use at Station Street, Nerang, a shopping centre that exists already, and this is for an expansion of the shopping centre, Mr Mayor, and there have been some changed conditions distributed to us by the officers, and so I'm drawing attention to that. I'll move the committee recommendation with these changes, which are in relation to condition 11, which is about CCTV, and condition 23, which is about the northern site access onto Station Street. Would you like me to read those specific conditions?
No, it's on the screen.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Corwell, want to speak further?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is a matter that could have been dealt with under delegated authority, but because the site has been contentious in the community and the fact that there was a significant amount of clearing on the site, which is adjacent to this particular element of the shopping centre, I thought it best to bring it for transparency. And you may recall we had another item a few months ago for the same site which dealt with timing of the approvals, old approvals. Now this extension is only relatively minor, but it is in accord with old approvals, and so it fits within the same footprint of the building, of the previous approval, and doesn't have any other impacts. The officers have been very diligent in their dealing with this matter, and they've engaged with the applicant and the applicant's consultants very earnestly, and there's been some great changes incorporated which deal with traffic movement through the site and car parking. I'm very confident that the outcome, once delivered, will be very much welcomed by the committee. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Anyone speak against the motion? All right. No need to close further. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Carry. Unanimous. Any other items you wish to deal separately? Councillor McDonald.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Item number 6. Mr Mayor, I'd like to move for a refusal of item number 6, and the recommendations are up on the screen. I have passed the refusal.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, speak on that.
Mr Mayor, this is a change of a development application. It was an aged care facility and it's now going to be residential. And the application is looking for a 50% height uplift. And under that 50% height uplift, there's a very strict criteria. The site itself is zoned for a 29-metre, approximately 9-storey building. In order for a 14-storey, 43.5-metre building to be approved on this site, it must meet all the requirements in the strategic framework provisions at 3.3.2.1 in brackets 9.
Yeah, can you pause there for a second, please? Councillor Gates has a conflict.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm so sorry, but in 2011 I received $675 from RPS, who are a consultant to this project. I made the declaration at committee and I'm seeking permission to remain in the room.
Okay. Was there a procedural motion? Yeah. Was it moved by you, Councillor Vorster?
That's my recollection, yes, Mr Mayor. Move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite her conflict of interest. because of the significant amount of time that's elapsed between the donation and today's decision, also given the remote nature of that gift from the matter at hand.
Okay. Second was Councillor Pauline Young. Just go to our solicitor for a minute. I thought decorations or gifts and things was meant to be this term and the previous term, like that is 2016. This is 2008. You think it's time I write to the local government minister or clarification? Like in one section of the law says 2 terms to put your registration of interest, and then longer term councillor back in pre-2016 are caught in this loop.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think it would be useful to again write to the state and raise this issue, because as you identify, there are different rules for the register of interests and what's a conflict of interest. I have given Councillor Gates some advice around this particular declaration to the effect that I would be comfortable with her not making the declaration because of the low value, the amount of time, and that it's out of the relevant term. But obviously, Councillor Gates, it's up to her what declarations that she chooses to make.
Yeah. Could you do a first draft for me?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
All right. And with Councillor Gates' consent, I might use this as an example where perhaps they change the law that we don't need to declare. All right. But while we're got to do something about it, moved by Councillor Vorster, second Councillor Pauline Young. Anyone want to speak against the motion? Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands.
Councillor Tate, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Tozer, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Barr Lumsden, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Vorster. Just ask how Councillor Hamill's voting, Mr Mayor.
In favour, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hamill.
Okay, against? Motion carried. Councillor Gates did not vote and will remain in the room. Back to Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Time starts again.
Mr Mayor, as I mentioned, to have the 50% uplift, it had to meet all the requirements of the strategic framework, and it's expected that this uplift may occur only in limited circumstances. In other words, approval for the exceedances should be rare, not the norm. Should the proposal fail to meet any single provision, approval is contrary to the city plan. Mr Mayor, there are no developments that have the same combined characteristics of height, 50% in excess of the overlay, and site cover that exceeds the AO, and density of 1 bed per 17.2 square metres, built on the beachfront. Whilst beachfront properties are increasing in density and height from the 1, 2 and 3 storey buildings, the cumulative effects of all of these relaxations on the beachfront site makes this proposal unique. This will be the first beachfront development of anything approaching this height in over 30 years. In the mid-90s, the town plan was changed to a 7-storey height limit, and the highest building prior to the change in height to metres is the Regency of 25.5 metres, I believe. Palm Springs, 25 metres, and these are 7 storeys. The eastern facade of this proposal is a building of solid mass. It actually looks like a bulky blob, with no articulation or recess and little cascading landscaping to soften the bulky form. The adjoining residents do not believe that the development satisfied specific outcome 3.3.2.1 in brackets 9b and does not achieve sympathetic interface with the adjoining developments and nearby residents. Residents believe minimal changes have been a total benefit to the applicant with loss of views and privacy amenity to the next door residents. There's shadow on the beach and, as we know, the Pacific Surf Club is next door. The development is contrary to the reasonable expectations of the community, having regard to the significant number of objections lodged in relation to the proposal of 131 residents. The proposed development, as it is, would diminish the sense of place. Also, Mr Mayor, I noticed that the coastal dune management policy restricts creation of private access to the beach over the dunes. In this instance, 19th Avenue is only a few metres away. When Hemingway was assessed, Council's preferred method of demonstrating compliance with performance outcomes for the Coastal Erosion Hazard Overlaid Code, in this case, has not been included. So, Mr Mayor, I ask that councillors support this refusal, as I believe that all the 8 outcomes are not satisfied.
Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question through you to Councillor McDonald. In your wording, you have intensity of the towers and cumulative impact of the towers. Do you mean that to be the tower, given the fact that it's just the one tower for this application? I'm not too sure how it becomes 2 towers, Mr Mayor.
Well, to me, I don't know if it's the 2 separate towers. Maybe we can have that clarified.
Councillor Caldwell.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to foreshadow the committee recommendation and when given a chance I'll speak against the motion that's on the table.
Okay. So I'll go to the director first. 1 tower or 2 towers?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe it is 1 tower. It does have a void through the centre of the tower, but it's 1 tower.
On page 504 of the agenda, you know, it does look like 2 towers, but it's technically just got a divot in it.
Okay.
That is actually only 1, but it looks like 2.
Councillor Jones.
Mr Mayor, I think it's got a design in it to break up the facade so that it actually achieves some of the things that the city plan requires it to achieve. So, Mr Mayor, I'd just like to ask a question in regards to item 3 of the recommendation for refusal, which is the number of community submissions. Mr Mayor, my understanding is that there was a considerable amount of submissions that were received and noted in the report as duplicates. The first question is whether or not those duplicate submissions are counted as part of the 123 submissions against.
Director.
Sorry, can you please repeat that, Councillor Jones?
So where it notes the number of people that have submitted against the application, it talked of a number of people that had put in duplicate submissions.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, I just wanted to make sure that that's not counted in that 123.
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, it wouldn't normally be, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And the adjacent property where there is a number of submissions received is taller, is that correct?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Jones, it is, and I believe there is a picture, which I'll just try and find the page that we were looking at. That it does include both of the towers and the neighbouring tower.
Thank you.
So you're saying that the taller building is complaining about the height of the shorter building?
Correct. And there are a third of the other submitters who are complaining against it are in Magnolia, which is the other new building, which is off height in the area, whose views will now be obstructed by this application.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Jones, page 502 of the agenda, so you can clearly see both Magnolia and the 19th Avenue building there with the new proposal.
All right. So So speaking against the motion, I think, Councillor Caldwell, you move a shadow motion. Do you want to allow Councillor Gates to, should I go to Councillor Gates to speak against first, or you want to?
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear what Councillor Gates says, because it...
All right, Councillor Gates, cherish your wisdom.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I actually moved this item at committee because this is a change application and the footprint is actually reduced, and the siting of the property or the proposed tower has been moved to the location forward on the site for the benefit of the neighbouring property. So there's a surf club one side, there's the 19 building, and to protect the amenity of each of the occupants, it was advised at committee that it was sited to the front of the site so that everyone got the maximum benefit. In moving the item at committee, Mr Mayor, I also highlighted page 509, which mentioned that the city architect had a look. They also commented on page 513 of the very high standard of appearance and architectural merit, the glazed balconies that assist to reduce the bulk and massing, and all of the elements that added interest and vibrancy to the proposed development. They summed up by saying the proposal achieves an excellent standard of appearance. And I think, Mr Mayor, at this prominent location, that's what we're looking for. The little inlet or void that Councillor McDonald thought made it 2 towers is also interesting, and when people see that and how beautifully it's landscaped, it will add a lot to this development. So for those reasons, and the fact that the Office of Architecture and Heritage have spoken so strongly about the proposal, the fact that the building next door is in fact higher, all lead me to be supportive of the application before us.
Speaking against the motion, Councillor Patterson.
Sorry, I thought I was for Councillor McDonald. Sorry, my apologies. You had me against. You go for Councillor McDonald. Sorry, do you mind asking again, Mr Mayor?
All right, you can go.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The words that jumped out to me when considering this were desired future appearance. And with the changes to the City Plan Amendment, under a code accessible, we can't consider any of that right now because that's not what the law is. That's going to happen in the future. However, when it comes to an impact accessible application that is dependent on what is deemed a desired future appearance, I think it is entirely legally defensible to say what we have proposed to the state government right now as our desired future appearance should be considered. So given that this is not recognised, or this height is not seen as the desired future appearance as we have presented to the state government. So it was interesting at the recent very well attended Main Beach Association meeting, and Councillor Caldwell made a very compelling argument for why we should be considering the potential for impact accessible in Main Beach, such as we have in other places. And the reason for that is because, to a certain degree, we are kind of shackled when it comes to a code accessible, even if it's performance-based, by that particular criteria. Here, the language is subjective, and as Councillor McDonald pointed out, it says that all those outcomes must be met. So for me, if I'm looking at the legal definition of what is desired future appearance, I think in that realm it's entirely acceptable for me to consider what we're proposing to the state government, which would mean that this could not be proceeding. So on that basis, I will not be supporting this.
Councillor Vorster, is that a question?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. If you've taken that as a speech form, I'm happy to speak against very briefly.
Okay, go ahead.
Entirely up to you. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I haven't interjected in the appropriate time. Look, Mr. Mayor, I think it's worth repeating something that was said at committee, and that is simply that we already have a development approval on the site. The choice for the community and the choice for the council is not this development or the status quo, which to my estimation is simply a bunch of amalgamated lots with nothing on them. That's not the choice facing the community or the choice facing us as a council. The choice is between two development outcomes. And for me, I have regard to what could otherwise be constructed rather lawfully by the proponent tomorrow. And I look at the two and I see one development, sure, that is higher than the other one. But in this case, we have the opportunity to support a development that has a much, much, much reduced footprint on the site. It's not a big, bulky aged care facility. It is a taller, more elegant and so visually interestingly designed building that it appears as two towers. So I would say that, sure, council could resolve to knock back this development by supporting Councillor McDonald, but we will end up with a far inferior development outcome for Palm Beach and the city. Rather than having something that is got a small footprint, that is far away from the Gold Coast Highway, so that we've got some variation in the streetscape, rather than that, we'll end up with something that's big, bulky and squat, and in my view, contribute to this hallwaying effect that's one of the tragic outcomes of the way that development is unfolding down the Gold Coast Highway. So I cannot support what Councillor McDonald is suggesting, because that doesn't take us back to a greenfield site with no development approval. It takes us back to the position where there is a development approval for a shorter, squatter building that takes up much more of the site, rather than opening it up and creating some visual interest on the Gold Coast Highway. And I might just say that my support for this development outcome does not necessarily suggest we should have private access to the beach. Quite the contrary, during committee I did highlight the fact that the state government has not yet finalised its plans for the Ocean Way down this section of Palm Beach, and in doing so it's robbed us of the ability at this early stage to make sure that we've got an appropriate setback between the building and the Ocean Way. But that's not germane to the way a development application needs to be assessed. Mr. Mayor.
Speaking for the motion. Okay, then I'll go to Councillor McDonald to close.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this is about the 50% uplift and meeting all that criteria to achieve that 50% uplift. Councillor Owen Jones raised the issue about the 19th Avenue apartments next door. That was another time, another town plan that was approved. That's back in the 80s. We are talking about today. There has been a couple of town plans since then, and the heights have been reduced in those town plans. However, Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned before, with this particular development, this is right up to the 8.1 metre setback from the beachfront. It's right on the beachfront. It's a big, bulky building, and the site approval is for required is for 43.5 metres, and there are no access to the beach conditions that are in this application. And Mr. Mayor, I would again ask the councillors to support me in refusing this development, because I feel that it is going to set a terrible precedent for the beachfront areas along Palm Beach and the rest of the Gold Coast when this criteria of the 50% uplift is applied.
Okay. Could you put the motion that's there, not the foreshadow, on the screen so people know what we're... All right. So, councillors, the debate's closed. Your
division.
Okay, the debate's closed.
Could I just suggest that Councillor McDonald corrects where she has towers, plural, because it is only one tower.
What statement?
I have a question in relation to the setback to the beach. I'm looking at page 477 and I thought the setback moved from 11 metres to 12.8 metres from the beach, and the way Councillor McDonald spoke, it implied to me that the setback is reduced to the beach. Can that be clarified for me?
Yes. Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Tozer. So the setbacks, the current position of the tower, it does satisfy the acceptable outcomes relating to the rear boundary, and it's outside of the 8.1 metre, which is the seawall setback. In terms of the specific number, I don't know if Mick's standing there. Mick might have it quicker than me, but I'll just have a look.
The agenda on page 477 talks about setbacks, and it says rear setback in the existing approval is 11 metres, and in the new approval is 12.8 metres. And it occurs to me that when the setback number goes up, it means that it's further away. If I'm missing that or I've got that wrong...
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
It's further back.
It is actually further back from the beach than what was previously...
That is correct.
Give me a nod, Mick.
Yep. 2 nods.
Yes. All right, councillors, debate's closed. The motion that I'm putting to you that council refuse this development, okay, to be clear, put the motion to you, or divisions call, all in favour, show of hands.
Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor Patterson.
Okay.
Councillor McDonald. Councillor McDonald.
Look, she's got to run her own. Okay, so just do your own voting. Otherwise, you're encouraging other people to vote, and we don't want any OAA stuff. Okay. And all in favour, show of hands. Against, show of hands. You got me.
Councillor Tate, Councillor Tozer, Councillor Neal, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Gates, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Bailey Lumsden, Councillor Vorster. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask how Councillor Hamill voted, Mr Mayor.
I'll be voting against, Mr Mayor.
Against. Councillor Hamill against.
So there's 4 names against, I think. For the motion. Yes. Yeah, I know the screen's wrong. Hold the horses. I'm calling it again. Minute taker. Delete all that. Minute taker. Delete all that. Minute taker. Delete all that. I'm calling the vote against. This is for the refusal. So you're voting, put your hand up if you're for the refusal.
Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Castro, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Patterson. I'll just ask how Councillor Hamill's voting, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hamill?
I'm against, Mr Mayor.
So you're not for the approval?
No.
Okay, so there's 4 names there now.
Peter Young.
All right. For those voting against the refusal, show of hands.
Councillor Tozer, Councillor Tate, Councillor Tozer, Councillor Neal, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Gates, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Bailey Lumsden, Councillor Vorster, and I think Councillor Hamill said he was against as well, Mr Mayor. Just confirm that.
So Your hand up? Is your hand up, councillor?
It is, Mr Mayor. Both hands are up.
Okay. I can't see it, but I can feel it. Motion's lost. I go to the full shadow. Councillor Caldwell, seconder. Councillor Owen Jones. Councillor Caldwell, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be brief, but I think it's important just to reflect on a few things that have been raised in the contemplation of this today. The first thing is that we have seen quite clearly that there is a significant reduction in the site coverage of this particular application. And perhaps if the original floor plate had been applied for with the 50% uplift, we might not have arrived at the same recommendation, or the officers might not have arrived at the same recommendation. But we're seeing a development now that has a 40% site cover, 2 car parks per unit on a 3,000 square metre block. I'm actually quite surprised that with an objective lens, Councillor McDonald hasn't found a way to actually support this, because it really is setting a pretty high standard for where we would expect developments to be in Palm Beach. And just to clarify for Councillor Patterson's thoughts in relation to future changes to the city plan, I actually don't think that we've made any changes that are impacting this particular block. We made changes that were between Jefferson Lane and the highway and Jefferson Lane and the beach, not north of...
Order.
So there won't be any particular change to this in this neighbourhood. And the most critical thing that we need to explain to our communities, and I ask each and every one of you to please go out and explain this, that the 50% is not a relaxation. It is a methodology that was introduced to make sure that we could provide the community with absolute certainty of where the upper limit of any building would be in their neighbourhood. If we didn't have that provision, the height of this particular building on a 3,000 square metre site in Palm Beach would be much, much higher than what is proposed. I'm absolutely certain of it. It would outstretch the 19th Avenue apartments, Royal Palm, Princess Palm. They'd all be dwarfed by something that could be achieved on a 3,000 square metre beachfront site. So it's actually important that we understand and explain the way in which those provisions in city plan work, because they are providing the assurance to our community that wasn't there before 2016, that you will not have a tower in your neighbourhood that is over and above what the provisions allow for. And that is the message that needs to be sent to give the community that certainty, because we have been very successful in the last 5 years in ensuring that no development breached that upper limit. That is something that we should all be very proud of, because it means that we can deliver certainty not just to the community but also to developers. They haven't felt the need to break through that limit. They know when they acquire the site what the parameters are, and they set about designing buildings that fit within them. So this particular application, it's an unbelievable site in one of the most spectacular parts of the Gold Coast, and I think it's well worth our support for the particular metrics and lifestyle that it will present for the community.
It's being against the motion? No, against the motion? No, I'll go to Councillor Caldwell to close.
That's fine, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Would you like the name recorded? Record Councillor McDonald. Motion carried. Any other items? Councillor Caldwell.
Number 9, Mr Mayor.
Okay, number 9.
And I'm happy to move this one, Mr Mayor, and oh, sorry, did you want to move it or you? So, happy to move this one with a change, which was again part of the suite of additional work circulated by the council officers relating to a new condition 59 relating to landscaping of the vacant site. So if we can just put that in, and if I have a seconder, I'll speak to that.
Seconder, Councillor Pauline Young.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Again, a good example of the work that was done by a committee to get the best possible outcome for the community in relation to this particular change application. And it has been, I know, increasingly of concern to Councillor Taylor that some of the high-profile development sites within the core of our city have been left unkempt, and the work done by officers here provides us with some good assurance that the vacant site, if it is to be that, will be kept in a better state. And Mr Mayor, I think you will agree that that is something that is an improvement on some of the things that we've seen across the city with some of the dilapidated buildings and vacant sites. So grassed, clear of debris, chain wire fencing and kept clean and tidy, and I think in this location that's a welcome change.
Speaking against the motion, Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I was not supportive of the original approval that was granted on this site some months ago, and I'm almost inclined to suggest this one be refused so that we can keep that previous approval with the rather novel, shall I say, car lift that was proposed in it, which seemed to be about the only redeeming factor in my point of view, which has now been removed, and with an intensification of the development in terms of the yield, it would have been better, in my opinion, that this application sought to actually remove or reduce some of those setback provisions, and to be more compliant, and that would have reduced the yield and been perhaps a more acceptable outcome for the local community. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
For the motion, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, I just want to talk to it. As most people are aware, that last year I had really concerns with this particular development, and I do have concerns with a lot of development in Division 10 at the moment because of the HX and the setbacks and code accessible, which makes it hard. We want really good development in our area, but at the same time, we want to ensure that the residents are protected. Look, in relation to last year, this particular development was approved. I wasn't for it last year. And this is just another example of, particularly through Division 10, and we do see it in other divisions, where multiple applications keep coming for one particular block of land. Less than 5% of developments in Division 10 actually go ahead. So what I'm looking for in the area is improvement of original development approvals. We just saw approval previously that we saw a large block of land with a tower, in my view, was a very good outcome for a particular area. Multiple blocks of land with less coverage on it is a very important part of our city makeup, and it's really important we do protect our areas, your main beach, your broad beaches, the palm beaches throughout the whole city. So again, what I've been looking for in this particular area is ensuring that, one, we get better setbacks and we get better coverage of land in our particular division and the city. I'm also looking for an improvement in any previous developments that we've had. So we've got a lot of approvals out there that, in my opinion, weren't good outcomes, but we are having developments coming to our table with improved from previous conditions. So this is a particular development that I wouldn't say I'm happy with, but it's an improvement from what we had previously. The car lifts, there's been improvements for the the queuing for cars. And the other big part of this is this condition that we've got on the table at the moment. It's really important that a lot of these developments, as I said, less than 5%, when they don't build the product they're going to build, they actually maintain those particular areas. We can see it through surface, broad beach, main beach, and we have seen it through other parts of the divisions, where we've just recently seen one down at Labrador, where the developers are acquiring these sites, but they're not developing and they're letting the areas run down. My view is if a developer wants to come up with a good application, they've got options. One, build the development that we're giving them the authorisation to build. Two, if they don't build it, maintain it to a high level to the city wants it to maintain. So we keep our area clean, we keep it presentable for everyone. We want pride in our city. And if the developers don't want to build it or maintain it, sell it to someone that does. So a condition like this is something for me is really important for the city, but my particular area. Again, this is now a second application within 12 months. So it's just reinforcing what is happening in this particular area of developments constantly coming back and not necessarily being developed. So we need to ensure that, one, we get to good development in our city. I accept that we're a growing city and we want to encourage it. We want to get good developments in the area, but we want to make sure they're maintained in our key parts of the city and the whole city alike. So thank you.
Against the motion? Councillor Colwell, do you want to close?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, and that's to say that reflecting on the comparison between the two applications, as Councillor Taylor has pointed out, this is a far superior outcome. It's a reduction to 24 units. There's an increase in car parking to 57. I know that the community surrounding this area were concerned about the Sky garages, notwithstanding the novelty of them. So they've been removed, and we've now got, I think, some wording which I hope will become the way forward for how we deal with vacant land through the city. And if we start to introduce this from now, we will start seeing better outcomes on development sites that are in transition across the city. So, thank you.
Debate's closed. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carried. Right. Any other items you want to deal separately? Councillor Colwell.
I'd be surprised if there's any left, actually. Yeah. So I move that the report of the Planning and Environment Committee's recommendations be adopted with the exception of item 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9, which doesn't leave many.
Seconder, Councillor Gates, put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried. Just before we move on to the next item, I'll check with the city solicitor, and I prefer to probably deal with committee recommendation motion first as we go, and if someone wants to vote against a foreshadow, can you just take that on board for me if I can do that, because it caused confusion, and anyway, we'll talk about that. Just take that on board. So, what's the next one? We're going to number 11.
Sorry, just Mr Mayor, just that exception of items 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, we missed 4. Thank you. Mr CEO, do I need to vote again? No. All right, we'll move on. Okay. We now go to consideration notice of motion. It's Neil. Neil, we'll go to number 12, question on notice, Mr CEO. No, nothing on notice. Presentation of petition, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I move that the petition be received and referred to a committee for consideration and report in accordance with section 24B of Council Subordinate Local Law 1.1.
Seconder.
This is the residents of High Street in Southport had the parking outside their streets removed, and it has had a significant impact on them. They are requesting that this be reviewed. There are possible options, angled parking and various types of parking. So they're just asking for an investigation to see whether there is any potential for residential parking being placed back.
All right, seconder, Councillor Jones. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried.
now that you know what it is.
Any other petitions?
Thank you.
General business? None. 15, other business. Proposed small business relief package. On that, Mr. CEO, I spoke to you earlier that some of the matter is in grey, and it's I wanted the words to go into close. No, not that one. No, it's not that one. All right. The reason is the local government's budget rating concession. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. For this item, and then we'll take you through. That way you can speak very freely, otherwise you'll be referring to some things that's in confidential. It's easy to do. I move it, go to close, second to Councillor Owen Jones. All in favour, show of hands. Against? Motion carry. Streaming off. Streaming on. Good. Councillors, small business relief package motions on the screen, seconded by Councillor Owen Jones. Move myself. Councillor Owen Jones. Councillor, basically we went right through and look at the best way to help our community, and one of the key factors was that the idea, I've wrote it down as a local dollar package to stimulate our local economy, and that if you spend $100, you will get $50 voucher. So you're getting on the Gold Coast, and this will be available to 60,000 Gold Coast residents, and that $3 million is being put towards that to stimulate our economy and help people. And the main thing that we added to here is that we included retail, so that it's a very broad, many places that you can use. Operationally, this will be handled by Destination Gold Coast, as they're done with the Happy Dollars, and continuation of other relief packages right through from item 4 onwards. And my thing is the CEO is working right through here, and we have found that within our budget, priority reserve, to fund this. So we're working within our budget to make sure that Gold Coasters are well looked after, and we will review all of this in our September budget review. Do you want to add further on that, Councillor Owen Jones?
Mr Mayor, only just to explain that Destination Gold Coast is the peak body on the Gold Coast in the context of tourism, and we're a tourism town. They are very much at the forefront of the industry that needs the most amount of help, and I think that the $3 million allocated towards the vouchers is the best way that the council can help them, and that I would encourage the other two levels of government in both the state and the federal government to make sure that the Gold Coast that's been pretty badly impacted by the most recent lockdowns is supported as much as possible in regards to the federal government JobKeeper, for example, Mr Mayor.
Anyone speak against the motion? Well, I'll close the debate. Put the motion to you. All in favour, show of hands. Against, motion carried, unanimous. Mr CEO, any other items? Meeting closed, 13:31. Donna, you ready?
Yeah. Good luck, Tom.